Hey everyone, this is County Executive Joe Parisi, and welcome to this edition of the Dane County Podcast. Today with us we have Mike Bruce, who is a supervisor at the county's Joining Forces for Families, aka JFF program, which this year is celebrating its 30th year in existence. I'm really excited to talk about JFF today because this is one of the, perhaps, arguably one of the most impactful programs, as well as one of the most kind of under the radar programs that we have in operation in Dane County in our Human Services Department. And these folks, the folks who work with JFF and our partners, do so much good in the community and make such a difference in people's lives, long-term lasting difference, that we thought it would be a great idea on the 30th anniversary to bring Mike in and, give folks a little overview of JFF and history and talk about it. And hopefully people can become more familiar with even more of the good work that we're doing out there. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Mike, you've been with JFF from the start pretty much, right?
I was just counting it up before. It's been, I think, 24 years with the county and 21 with JFF.
That's great. Mike, could you start by giving us a little kind of overview and maybe even history of JFF, how it came into being and some of the work that you folks do?
Sure. I was just talking with some people to try and make sure I understood exactly how things kind of got going. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like in 1993, there was a group of people led by then County Executive Rick Phelps, mm-hmm. That really wanted to take a look at how human service provision could look differently and function more in sort of a team collaborative kind of format out in communities. And so we launched with 2 sites in 1994. One was in Vera Court, the other was in then Broadway Simpson, now Lake Point. And from there, we have grown to now we have 16 community social workers, 2 housing specialists, a community coordinator, myself as a supervisor, and soon to be one more supervisor that we'll be hiring for in the next month or 2 here. So it was an effort, I think, most of all, to decentralize services, mm-hmm. to be accessible, to get to see people out in neighborhoods. And we've been working on that ever since. And I should say that before we get going, if it weren't for Rick, then Kathleen Falk, and now you, we wouldn't be anywhere. We wouldn't be able to do this work. We wouldn't be able to have been involved in hopefully supporting folks. And we just appreciate the support. None of this would have been possible without each of you.
Well, thanks, Mike. And you guys are obviously an incredibly worthy and impactful initiative. And I'm glad you mentioned Rick too, because, I will say Rick Phelps was, in addition to JFF in general, really built the foundation of our modern human services department and infused a lot of resources into getting people out into the community, to helping people address the root causes of their challenges. And today, his vision has grown to a place where, as well as anyone else, it makes such a difference in people's lives. And I think it's really important to recognize those kinds of contributions. So thank you for saying that. So we know that Joining Forces for Families is decentralized services in the community, helping to make folks accessible, being there when people need them. First of all, is there such a thing as a typical JFF office, and what are some of the things that you all get involved with?
Yeah, so no such thing as a typical office or a typical day at Joining Forces, and that is one of the things I frankly love the most about it, and I miss a little bit about being directly in the neighborhood. So maybe I'll talk just a little bit about the JFF approach, and then we can kind of go from there.
Perfect.
So JFF is first one of the most unique human services programs that we've ever encountered. It really is an interesting challenge to describe because all of the things that typically go with a lot of other programs end up being very different for us. And so I'll start by saying that the first thing is we are in 17 different community locations right now in Dane County, and each of those communities are different. And so the way our offices function is really a reflection of the unique sort of needs, challenges, but also resources and opportunities and people that happen to be in those places. And so our office on Allied Drive is going to look and function quite a bit different than our office in Stoughton. And I think that really is a good thing because it reflects the sort of ongoing real-time needs challenges that are happening there. And so that makes it sometimes tricky to describe overall all of the initiative. I'm going to do my best I can right here. So we at JFF, one of the things that I mentioned unique is really different is that we have sort of two focuses. One is on working directly with families and people. And so we're going to take the time to get to know the situation you're in, to listen, to start where you're at. We're going to have this understanding of resources that are around because we're embedded in this neighborhood. We've taken opportunities to get to know the people, the places, the agencies, the churches, the folks living there. And that knowledge helps us to really understand, okay, what options are there that we may be able to get you connected to something that could help. And then the relationships we have with those places allows us to sort of ease that connection. We do a lot of advocacy around connections to resources, but also all kinds of issues. And I can get into some examples later, but we advocate with landlords. We advocate to get people connected to services, to help people from not being evicted or establishing a plan, all different types of things. And then finally, we do some work on sort of direct support of people to help fill in the gaps of things that aren't happening or working for people. So that's one side. On the other side, we really say that we focus not just on working with people, but also supporting communities. So that means, as I said, getting to know the people, the players, the agencies, the neighborhood centers, the churches. And there are these wonderful grassroots resources in many places that we've been fortunate enough to help sort of grow at many times. And so we are going to, can we help tighten the circles of communication so if someone needs help, we get them to the right place? Can we identify service gaps that are consistently coming up and put our heads together on how best to help people with that? Maybe to advocate for something that looks a little different, maybe to do a project in a community to help sort of build some of those things up. So one of the things that really is different is this dual focus on people and the place of community. And I think both sides of that equation sort of feed the other. The challenge with that, if I can be frank, is that we are asking people to do a lot. And so that is a tricky bit to sort of balance your time, your priorities, because a lot of people are coming at us from a lot of places.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing when one sees the impact versus the number of staff people that we have out in the field, because of the fact that you do serve as somewhat of a center of gravity almost. And all of these other community partners you mentioned come into that orbit. And the accessibility of JFF workers is so key. And as you know, I mean, you might be somewhere like in Sun Prairie where a JFF worker is in part of an office building that has other community support agencies. In other neighborhoods, the JFF worker will be literally in an apartment building, occupying an apartment. And that kind of accessibility, I have been visiting JFF workers in apartments, and folks know they're there, and they just show up and knock on the door and say, hey, can you help me figure this out? And so it's that place to turn when people don't know where to turn. And the JFF workers become so well known in the community and become part of the community. People know and trust them. And the resources that can come to bear from just that one individual in a community, it's just exponential versus, the amount of resources that are put in place. That's why I'm constantly impressed with what you mentioned. You have, not a lot of people solving so many challenges and juggling so many different pieces, but bringing together the power of the community and bringing everyone together to work in conjunction and not overlap, but complement each other and make all those services, which can be hard to figure out and to find, accessible to folks.
Yeah, it's been just a big change in how you go about sort of helping people. But I will say that the vantage point that we have really puts us in an excellent position. We have literally, over the course of a year, thousands of contacts with families, with service providers, with grassroots efforts. And that really gives us a unique perspective on how are things fitting together or not fitting together? What resources are really needed? And one of the things we're really working on now is how do we take that information and give that to people in a respectful, ahead of time way that people can use to consider, amongst other things and other information about making choices. Because we feel like it's really an excellent opportunity to sort of gather some of that information based on what we're seeing across all of Dane County and kind of put some of that to work.
Mm-hmm. Mike, could you give us maybe an example or two of kind of, I don't know if you have any kind of stories in mind or examples of folks who have come in and what their experience might look like? And granted, there are thousands of different experiences, but do any stand out in your mind?
Well, I'll just say, one of the more recent things that we've been working on, and I'll give you an example on the individual side and maybe on the collective side, just to round some of that out.
Sure.
So recently, DCHA, Dane County Housing Authority, and CDA from the city of Madison opened up a lottery for Section 8 housing vouchers. That happens once every great while. Usually it's 6, 7, 8 years in between. And we had multiple offices working on this, but our office on the north side was able to help people fill out applications, make connections, fill out the priorities you need to do, make sure all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed. And we're able to get dozens and dozens of families access already to housing vouchers. That's a permanent housing voucher that has you paying 30% of your rent. That's a life-changing endeavor.
Yes.
For a family. And then we seek to sort of remain in contact with people. If something's happening, reach out to us. We let the landlords know we're here. And we find that stability is a key factor, maybe the most key factor in people's development. It's a thing that is by far the largest need that we see. And it's one that is very difficult to meet, especially in the short term sometimes. But in this particular instance, it was connections to local community centers and local agencies, and just knowing people coming in the door, getting the stuff done correctly, following up with advocacy, making sure that we're on the email that comes through to say if you got accepted into the lottery, and then also helping people find different ways to get connected to places that they can get into. And so I think really just a lot of good was done in this very brief but important opportunity. On the flip side of that, one thing I'm really proud to talk about is we have done some work in partnership with the City of Madison's Office of Civil Rights in terms of partnering with folks to make sure that they're connected with resources if you happen to live in the city, if something's happening that does violate your civil rights. And we had a very, very large housing complex on the west side of Madison that had hundreds of units, and they sent non-renewal notices to anyone that had a Section 8 voucher, which is not legal, but was very scary. And a lot of people don't know that it's not legal or don't know how to address that. So we were able to partner with our local JFF workers, Sarah, Office of Civil Rights, Legal Action, the Tenant Resource Center, the City of Madison Neighborhood Resource Teams, others locally, to get all that information to people, have community meetings, and to make sure that this landlord, with the help of the Office of Civil Rights, understood that this is not okay. And we were able to rescind all of those non-renewals and get to work on how do we support people in being able to remain in these places and keep kids connected to the schools that they've been going to. So that's sort of a bigger community effort, but those are two kind of recent things that we've worked on.
Yeah, and those two examples kind of speak to kind of the perspective I like to take sometimes on programs when I'm looking at them and evaluating them. I ask, if not for this, then what? So I look at both of those situations that you just mentioned, and if we ask the question, what if JFF did not exist? What if you guys weren't out in the neighborhoods? How differently both of those situations would have played out, and how differently so many lives would have been impacted negatively. And I think those are just wonderful examples. And it's also an example of how you work with the entire community and that exponential impact that even a single worker is able to have because of your approach. One of the ways that I've benefited, one of the many ways that I've benefited from JFF and learning from JFF workers and assessing need and talking to you all is early on in my career as county executive, I was going around visiting different JFF offices, and I visited the JFF folks in Verona. I remember we met in a church basement, and it was me and the JFF worker, and then part of their team, right? A school social worker, law enforcement, some community volunteers. And at that point, I was asking, what is the biggest need on your radar screen? And we certainly know that housing kind of trumps everything, right? But there are, in addition to housing, the topic of mental health services for young people and young people, particularly in school, came up, and the law enforcement folks were talking about getting called to the schools and how, they were willing to do it, but they felt there was a better approach for young people, and as did everyone there. And so out of that one meeting grew our Building Bridges school-based mental health program that now is in every school district in the county, virtually. There might be one or two small ones that have not opted in, but virtually every district in the county now has mental health teams as a major county initiative in partnership with the school districts that have helped hundreds and hundreds of kids and their families, all because of this one meeting and because of how tuned in JFF is and connected in the input that we got from that meeting. So just another example of the broader impact that this program has in identifying the most challenging needs and helping craft solutions to them.
Yeah, and if I could add, Joe, I think this is a great illustration because Building Bridges is some of our key partners now in all kinds of communities that come to our meetings. We work families together. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, on my way here, I was talking to a worker about sort of blending some different things to help someone make sure they could remain in housing, get through some tragedies that were happening just right on the way here. And it would have been one thing to get a nice pilot program in place at a couple of schools that did some real good for families. But because of the support of your office and Dane County, more broadly, this has grown to the entire county for the most part. Mm-hmm. And I just think, and even if you look at a place like the basement in Verona, you've been to our new Verona office at Badger Prairie Needs Network, and to see the power of people working together, private, public, all types of things, and we really can grow some things. And the approach to Building Bridges is one that really makes a lot of sense, and that's because you paid attention to the people that on that ground floor that had that insight, that were working with families, people themselves, and ultimately by using a process like that, we have a better sort of plan that ideally is able to do a lot better for people, and Building Bridges works.
Yeah. It is interesting, and I think this is part of the JF model, and for folks in positions like mine and policymakers, not just in the county and everywhere, but finding solutions to our deepest challenges are. I don't want to say this in the wrong way to make it sound like it's easy and we have the answer to everything, but being as impactful as possible with the resources we have is not as challenging as one might think when it comes to designing programs. What you need to do is recognize, folks in my position and other policymakers, that we don't have the answers. We don't necessarily have the personal experience and the know-how to address the challenges, but there are folks like you and like your circle of people you work with who are very aware of what the challenges are and very aware of what is needed, and you all really need to be listened to, because again, ultimately, the conversation that you had today and the relationship that you folks have with Building Bridges and others is directly the result of you sharing your knowledge, and I hope that people continue to recognize the wealth of knowledge that is there, because no one understands it better than you and your workers.
Yeah, and if I could just add that, one of the things that it's just been a blessing for me personally is the discovery of how much is known and how many good ideas and good insights people have that actually live in neighborhoods, and how
Hmm.
often we either don't ask those questions, don't work with them, or worse yet, what we see a lot is we ask them but don't listen, and
Yeah.
that can really be harmful in the process of doing something. So just a really brief example. This is one of my favorite things that came up. You know a little bit about this person. We had a situation where a Walgreens was built right across the street from a combined elementary and middle school. And after school, kids would go to the closest place they could get candy and soda and things, just like every school since the
Hmm.
dawn of time in every place. And that caused problems, and it caused the inevitable. We can only have 2 or 3 students in here, no backpacks. We can't have, and all of these families are the people that are going to this Walgreens and making money. And so but it was really challenging. It bothered the community. And then there were things happening in the parking lot where people were gathering. There were some fights sometimes. And so I got involved because I was tired of hearing about this at neighborhoods. I said, hey, I know this guy, Tony, and he works at the neighborhood center across from Albert Park. Now, Tony is a giant man that's an MC and also is really good with kids. And so we had Tony out there, and people were very different with Tony there. I would be too. And just a wonderful person with a skill set. And I thought to myself, man, that was a good idea. We did all right. And then that went away. With some funny things and stuff that happened. And then we had a bunch of incidents culminating in a fight between a kid and a security guard, that they were using security now instead of this other approach. That security guard was hurt. It was a big uproar in the neighborhood. And at that point, some neighbors came together and created a program called Parents on Premises. That was out of the Mellowhood Foundation. And they hired parents to be in that parking lot after school. And it's one thing to act a certain way when it's anonymous. It's another thing when the person there knows your grandma and your mom and knows you a little bit. And they had no problems. And so I thought I had a good idea, but it turns out just by listening to people, there were much better ideas to be had. And we just, part of JFF is tapping into that potential in lots of different ways.
Yeah, people know what they need. People know what their neighborhoods need. And as you say, we just need to listen, because I think, especially in days gone by, the approach has been not necessarily here, but just in general, an approach is often, we're going to come in here and we're going to fix it because we know how to fix it. No, we don't. The neighborhood knows what it needs. We need to know how to listen and to empower people to do what's necessary. And boy, you sure do that. So you've mentioned some of the community partners, Mike. And again, they're so different in every location. It depends on the resources. And one of the things we hear a lot about is the difference in challenges of people who live, say, in the metro area and people who live in more rural areas as far as access to cities and services. Could you talk a little bit about some of those differences and the challenges and maybe some of the solutions that you try to put in place for folks?
Sure. I think so. This is a hallmark issue for us. And one of the things that I was very surprised to learn. So where you live has an awful lot to say about what type of support and resources you can access. There are regional things that are available to people living in Dane County. We, of course, understand those things, but there are also grassroots efforts, often led by churches and other unique sort of local partners that really add a bunch of stuff to the equation and can be the difference in someone being able to stay in an apartment and someone having to move. And so there are some neighborhoods with robust support, lots of people working together, lots of natural partners. There are other places that have little to none of that happening because of, unique geographic differences. There might not be churches there. There might not be a school close by. There might not be a neighborhood center and other things like that. And so the inequity of, by happenstance of where you live, what you can access really makes a big difference. Now, one thing I will say that is amazing about our rural communities is they often have a very defined community identity. So a place like Sun Prairie, for instance, can say, we want to support families that have kids going to our schools, and we're going to put some things in place. And they have an outfit there called Sunshine Place that does a lot of things, but housing, food pantry, clothing, all types of support. And when that entity is in the mix with JFF and other partners, we can just do a lot more. And so we see a lot of that growth in rural communities because there's a really defined identity there. In the city, there it's broken up into school districts and streets and neighborhoods, and there are some places with lots of work and some places with almost none. And so that gets really kind of confusing. So that's one way this sorts. On the other hand, we do a lot of work we have a pretty equal split of people in rural communities and people in the city overall. And a lot of times when we listen to folks in rural communities, there's a lot of struggles that they have in accessing things. Transportation's a big barrier. We've done some work around that and bus lines out to Sun Prairie and some other places, but it remains a really difficult thing. So if you need to get to Madison for anything, it's going to be a trick if you don't have a vehicle. In many places, there is no way to do it unless you know someone that can get you there. Our homelessness resources are concentrated in the city of Madison, and understandably, that's where the more pronounced need is. But if you happen to be in that situation in a rural area, it is going to be remarkably difficult to make those connections. And I don't say that to blame anyone. It's just a challenge, that people have. And so we try and kind of hold up all of those different needs, different issues, and work based on the context that we have. But it's really some different, it's just like anything else. There are these opportunities that exist in these places, but then there's kind of different challenges that you have to, come up against. And one of the things at JFF that we struggle with at times, I have 2 or 3 workers that help cover 2 offices, and that's meant to give us more accessibility in rural areas. But that's a lot to have 2 separate offices, 2 separate places to be, 2 separate groups of partners that are different. That is really that can, for obvious reasons, be a big challenge. And so we're sort of constantly trying to put prioritize the things that make the most sense, that are going to be the most helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good example of why it's challenging to talk about JFF in general, because while there are common themes, the situations vary by community and by neighborhood. You, as someone who's been a JFF worker, who's now a JFF supervisor, are there general themes that if you had the resources and the ability to flip a switch or two, that you think would be impactful, the most impactful generally to the folks you're working with?
I mean, that's a difficult question, because a lot of the things that are the deepest challenges are the most immovable of barriers. We have a housing crisis here.
Yeah.
It is extremely difficult to afford housing, to be able to get into housing with screening criteria, to be able to maintain housing, and get paid enough to make kind of all of that work. So across the board, we are in need of increased shelter space, increased transitional housing, and more access to affordable housing. And a lot of times the housing that gets built that is sort of labeled as affordable doesn't feel always so accessible. We've done a lot of good work on that, and I think we're getting better, but it isn't always a thing that people can get into. So that variable dominates the landscape the same in rural areas as it does in the city of Madison. And so that number one is finding some way to keep, making investments there that actually allow people to get into housing and have a chance at sort of making it. And I will say, in rural communities, one of the things that can happen is there's very limited housing stock that isn't expensive. And so those communities are often crying out for some options that just are more affordable, more accessible for people. That happens in the city in a different way, but people can become pretty isolated. And when someone comes to us in Wanakee, for instance, and says, hey, I'm being non-renewed, I need to find a place, I want my kids to continue going to school here, there just aren't that many options necessarily that people are going to be able to find that they can afford and access. So housing's the first one. If we're talking about rural areas, one of the things that comes up there especially is, hey, I need to get my car fixed. My car broke down. I can't get
Mm-hmm.
to work. If I can't get to work, I can't pay my rent. And the bus service, as we talked about, doesn't mention in the same way. So I'll give you a quick example of sort of our work and how we address those things. So in Stoughton, we used to have a program that helped with car repairs. There was a person that ran it that passed away, and that sort of dissolved, that nonprofit dissolved over time. There were a group of people that talked about this at a JFF meeting. They decided to form a work group. They started talking to people. They got 2 sort of auto shops, willing to help out and give some discounted prices and rates. They started talking to businesses, places like Stoughton Trailers. It was like, yeah, we would be happy to help. That's a need that we see. And right now they have a program. It's a very small program because oftentimes that help is still not accessible, but it's the start of something that has potential to kind of work on some of those things. So it's tricky to put my finger on things that would really move the needle. But what I would love to see is a platform where we are engaging people that live and work in neighborhoods to be a part of designing locally informed ways to, and that work, we do some of that work, but we're sort of one person often in a neighborhood doing a lot of things. And that stuff can happen on its own, but if a structure was in place for those conversations to take place and just put some weight behind what people are thinking, it can make a profound difference. And I've been in a position where I've had people that were able to do that alongside me, and I've seen neighborhood centers built and put into place because of efforts of local people and neighborhoods. We've seen programs happen, all types of things. And so I think those kind of investments could pay a lot of dividends. And we have a lot of people out there that do not feel connected to our systems, to our schools, feel like they're not being heard, feel like it's not always a good fit, or they can't get in to get the support they need, or they're not being heard, and all these things. And I just think some work on a more robust opportunity to listen and to work on some things really could make a difference.
That's interesting. So it's really, while there are concrete solutions that could be put in place, it's almost like there's still more of a process solution that's needed. Because while there are universal themes, even where there are universal themes, they will likely look different in each neighborhood, each community, and being able to engage those community to help identify and design the solutions to those challenges is key.
Yeah, I've just seen a lot of good things come about because of sustained effort on that front in conjunction with system partners and things that are happening. And so, we talked about Badger Prairie Needs Network in Verona. The growth of that with the help of county investment and private investment and local players, what they're able to do there now is a world apart from what it was in the basement of a church.
Yeah.
And that's listening to people, that's bringing people together. They're going to have challenges. But it really can make a difference. And it's I got to tell you, it's critical because part of what I want to do is try and keep it real here. Of all the things people come to us with, we often are unable to help. That's a more common situation than we can get something. So I got a lot of good stories, but I got an awful lot more of things that didn't work out, a lot of trauma, a lot of people really being hurt and really on the struggle. And I worry about our staff all the time because they are confronted with this over and over and over again. And we live in a world where services have become, in many instances, very specialized, needing people to go to lots of different things to try and figure out how to get help. And in a place where we pride ourselves on being a little more general, that gets a lot of people to us. And so how to manage that, what we see is people that have been given 6 or 7 numbers by folks that really want to help, and they've called those numbers, and they haven't been able to access that help for whatever the reason may be, mostly a lot more need than the support that's available. And there's a wait list or whatever there is. And they're finally to us, and they've told their story 6 different times. They don't want to have to tell their story to strangers. And we're going to sit there and we're going to listen, and we're going to give them the honest truth as we have been able to sort of discern by being in these places and knowing what's available. Even if that's really hard to hear.
Yeah.
And then we're going to work with that reality and do everything we can to support. We're certainly going to make connections, but sometimes it's a conversation like, okay, you're going to have to access the shelter system, or we're going to have to find some family. And so we try to pride ourselves on really respectfully keeping it real with people so that we're going to get folks. It would be easier sometimes to say, here's some numbers for you, but we're going to sit there and we're going to do the best we can to just be real. And it's rough out there for a lot of people. I know you understand that. And I just don't want to overcast the work that we're doing. There's a lot of good, but there's a lot of challenges that we sort of take in every day too.
Yeah. And I think that's an important point. And I think it's important to recognize how challenging it is for your workers, for the folks who are in the community every day. On one hand, there's the reward of being able to help people. But then, as you mentioned, there's the other piece where sometimes you can't, or sometimes you can help move to a stopgap. And then, the JFF workers are human beings, and they're dealing with that, and they have to figure out what to do with that in their head and be able to get up and go to work the next day and continue to be effective as well.
Yeah, and I think one real clear example of this, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up, is, at JFF, we have worked extremely hard to both diversify our staff in terms of language capacity and other things. And so right now we have actually half of our staff, 9 of 18, are bilingual, 8 in Spanish, 1 Hmong. And we have seen, as almost all communities have, an influx of folks that have recently arrived here. Many times people come here with very little. They don't have a place to be necessarily, or if they do, it's very temporary. They may not have the clothes they need, may need access to food, services, definitely housing, employment. All of these things happen, and there is not a very connected plan about there's a lot of good people out there in a lot of places doing great work to support those families, but there's not a lot of answers in there. And so I am on Badger Road, directly next door to Centro Hispano, which is a big partner of ours, and down the street from the Catholic Multicultural Center, who also does a lot of work with this population. And our Immigration Affairs Office is also in the building with us. And the amount of people coming in, and I just talk to our worker Lily over there all the time, like, are you doing okay? Because it's just too much for any one person or one agency to sort of work on. And so, some of those challenges, like taking that in on a daily basis and wanting to be helpful, and sometimes we can be, but oftentimes the challenges are just too large in the short term, can be really difficult. And I will say one thing that I'm really proud that Lily and some of our other workers, Jeanette and Lucero, have done is they brought a thing together called MAPA. It's Madison Area Partners and Alliance. I'm getting the name wrong, but they bring a group of people together. The first, I think it's Monday or Tuesday, one of the first days of the month. And they have, I think it's first Monday of the month, and they have, folks from Centro there. We have some JFF people. We have folks maybe from MG&E. We've had folks that help register kids in schools. And the idea is, can we bring people together to get more of these support and services in one place to be more efficient? But what I really love about it is, and can we create the space for these partners and these agencies to talk together, to support each other, to have ideas? And so that feels really good. But the challenge of it and the just sheer volume of need remains.
Yeah. And it's pretty much on us right now too, because the federal and state government aren't exactly showering resources on us. So the work that folks are able to do with the resources we have is pretty remarkable. But as you said, very, very draining. Mike, as people, might be listening to this, as we talk about our partners in the community, we work with a lot of faith communities and other organizations. If there are folks who feel that they might have something to offer as part of a team or a neighborhood coalition, should they reach out to their nearest JFF office? How can they find out where that is? How could someone at least be plugged in to see if maybe they could be of assistance in the work of their local JFF folks?
So, I mean, I'd say the main thing is, and we talk about this even with referrals all the time. We ask people, hey, please, if you can, email or reach out to the worker in this area directly, because then you can have a quick sort of triage on, here's what we can do, here's what's difficult, that type of thing. So for something like this, and perhaps we can put something up on the screen that has the QR code for our website. But really the best thing to do is to go to the Joining Forces for Families section on the Dane County website. There's a map on there, and you can find the office that would be closest to you, and you can reach out to that person directly. Email is often the easiest first contact because we can see those more efficiently, but phone calls are fine too. And have a conversation with that person to see. And sometimes there may be some ways that people can get involved. Other times, maybe we may know of something locally that's happening that we could talk about. And the other thing would just be to call me directly or email myself. I make a lot of these connections for people because it's not always obvious exactly where to go. So I'd say those are the two ways, but the main thing is to plug in and to learn a little bit about what's happening locally, because all of our offices, as we've discussed, are going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, that's great. And so that advice would be not only for people who feel they would like to help, but if someone is in need of services and needs to, or knows someone who is, that would be their best way to connect, to look on the website, identify where the closest JFF office is, and reach out.
Yes, it's 100% the best way. And we know that people are busy and you can't always perfectly do that. But what we found is with a very brief interaction, we can set some expectations and make sure we're doing this handoff to a family, especially if it's someone that needs services, in a respectful, informed way, where we're minimizing sort of false hope and things like that. That might be a little too extreme, but we've just found that way of connecting people really helps and makes a difference. So we often ask for people when possible to do it that way.
Great. Well, Mike, as you know, I know a number of the JFF workers. I've known you since I've been county executive. And when I talk to you, and I think people watching or listening to this, it will be obvious to them too, the work you do this is not obviously close to just a job for you. This is something that you're incredibly passionate about. You and the other workers that I know care so deeply about this work and the people you serve, and I just have so much respect for you all. Could you talk a little bit about Mike, about kind of your journey through JFF and kind of how this has impacted or maybe impacts you on a personal level, because it's so much who you are, and it's so real. It would be interesting just to, if you'd like to share a little bit about your journey with JFF.
Yeah, no, I'm happy you asked that question. Trying to think the best way to answer this. Let me start by saying I am forever indebted to having this opportunity. It's been life altering for me. I don't know where I would be if it weren't for this opportunity, and I want to say that hopefully I've gotten to be a part of doing a little bit of good and helping some people along the way, but there is no question that I've learned more and been helped more myself than I've been able to put out in the world. And my journey with JFF ironically started the first time I did an internship. My first year of graduate school, it's at the School of Social Work here at UW-Madison. And I was in the Dane County field unit, not on purpose. It just sort of happened. And I did my first interview, and there's like cubicles. And I thought, oh yeah, this is exactly what I thought this would be. And then I did my second one at the Joining Forces office in Sun Prairie. And I got out there and I'm like, this is an apartment. What is happening here? And it was, it looked like an apartment. It didn't look like an office. There was kind of stuff all over the place. And I remember thinking to myself, 20 minutes and you're out of here. You never have to think about this again. and it's a true story. And I sat down and I started listening, and I thought, man, this is actually really interesting. And so I did an internship there, and long before I was done, I knew that I had to try and get involved in this somehow. I knew that was back in 1999, probably. I knew that I felt like I had something to offer, but also I was very interested. And so I ultimately took a job with Dane County, did child maltreatment investigations for 3 years in hopes that I could get connected to this job. And then after about 3 years, little less than that, I had the opportunity to open a new JFF office. And so along the way, I'll just say, Joe, that the people that I've met, just heroes, frankly, people living in neighborhoods, folks like Dion Carruthers that work for the school district and sort of a mentee of Milt McPike over at East High School. I mean, amazing human beings that I've learned so many things from and been so privileged to work with. I think one of my favorite memories ever being at JFF was Barack Obama's initial inauguration. I sat in the same office you've been to way back when on Russet Road with 3 or 4 elderly African-American gentlemen, and they were just weeping. And I thought, how lucky am I? It's just such a privilege to be here and just have the trust to, just to be there with them in that air at that time. And knowing that just how much it mattered for them on their own terms. And so those types of things have happened over and over again. I've gotten to know people like Helene Nelson, who's been a mentor to me and helped. And it's just been life-changing. And the only reason I took the supervisor job here is because there's nothing that means more to me than having this work continue to grow and to sort of be a good fit for the current times we're in, which requires some, changing and some alterations. But like I said, it's just been a blessing to get to see and know all these people. I'll say one more thing. A thing that's near and dear to my heart: soccer. My kids play, and my son plays in college. And I spent maybe 10 years running low-income soccer teams. Those kids are grown now. I've dragged my kids to all of those things. They know all of those folks. They've been able to be around people in neighborhoods in a different way. And so my journey at JFF has not only been a benefit to me, but to my entire family. And so, like I said, I just appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thanks, Mike, and thanks for sharing that. So 20 minutes turned into 20 plus years and counting, and we're glad it did. Well, Mike, thank you, and thank you to all of the JFF workers, all of our partners in the community, everyone who's involved in JFF, and as well as the people who are served and from whom we learn as well. So it was really great that you were able to take this time today to share with us and give folks a little more insight. Before we sign off, is there anything we left out that you wanted to mention, or are we good? If we hit it, I just want to make sure I didn't leave you with something unsaid that you wanted to mention.
Oh, there's lots of things we could talk about. I'll just say that I really appreciate the support that you and your office has provided, not only for Joining Forces for Families, but for other sort of voluntary initiatives like Community Restorative Court, Immigration Affairs. We hope that we are a small part in paving the way for helping to have those other creative things happen. And without your leadership and others that are working for you, we could be just a run-of-the-mill sort of human services sort of department. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I am so proud that these investments have been made, and we're working our level best to make a difference and make sure that we turn that investment into real meaningful good for people out in neighborhoods. So thank you.
As you do. Well, it's been an honor, Mike. I guess that's it. That sounds like a really good place to end. Again, if you want more info about JFF, head to the website if you need to be in contact with anyone. But I think this is a good place for us to wrap it up for today. Mike Bruce from Joining Forces for Families, thank you again for being with us. And we'll see all of you on the next Dane County Podcast. Thanks.